There we go. Okay. All right. So listen, Aaron hasn't been here before. Haley's been here before. And so Aaron, let me just take a second to tell you a little bit about how we usually do this and a little bit about myself. I was a lawyer for 25 years while I served on 3 nonprofit boards, and then I became an executive director of a nonprofit, and then I started this. So that's my 10-second introduction. And then what we do with Austin Nonprofit is each month we have a topic for the month, and it's related to one of the 5 focus areas of nonprofits. And we either I'm the only presenter, or we have a presenter, expert presenter such as Stephen today, or we have a panel of speakers. Sometimes we have co-presenters, sometimes we just do networking. And we used to have between 30 and 60 people that would come to these. So I'm happy the 2 of you are here today. Hopefully we'll get a couple more, we'll see what happens. That's the format that we use. And so let me, I was going to share slides, but I'm not going to now, Steve, until the end, and I'll let you do your thing when we start. I wanted to tell you a little bit about Stephen, and I just realized I'm trying to use my mouse on my other device. That doesn't work. All right, so Stephen is not only the Chief Engagement Officer at Bloomerang, and not only a prolific writer and speaker, and the head honcho of all the educational content at Bloomerang, including the host of their weekly webinar series, but he is also a fundraising guru. He volunteers his time on the project, the work group of the Fundraising Effectiveness Project. Are you 2 familiar with that project?
No.
Okay. After this is over, you should look it up. It's a joint effort of the Association of Fundraising Professionals and the Center of Nonprofits and Philanthropy at the Urban Institute. And they conduct research on fundraising effectiveness. And I think they do surveys every year. Is that right, Steve? Do they do those every year?
Yeah, and I'm going to talk about it in this presentation. So we'll.
Oh, goody. Okay, I won't spend a lot of time. It's a very impressive organization. Anyway, he also volunteers for the Study Fundraising Steering Group at the Hartsook Center for Sustainable Philanthropy at Plymouth University. He's a committee member of the AFP Center for Fundraising Innovation and sits on the faculty of the Institute for Charitable Giving. I'm trying to make this device work. He's a frequent speaker everywhere that matters to us in the nonprofit sector. He is the co-author of Fundraising Principles and Practice, 2nd edition, and the author of, I love this title, Robots Make Bad Fundraisers, How Nonprofits Can Maintain the Heart in the Digital Age. And I want to know how you have time to do anything, because that's a lot of stuff. So welcome. Thank you for joining us, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is a lot of fun. And thanks for you 2 for logging on. And if you're watching this as a recording, I hope you're having a good day no matter when and where you are. Connect with me, even if it's months later, no problem. So yeah, I appreciate the invite, Nancy. I've had you on my webinar series. So I feel like this is payback, right? So now that was a great session that you did for us at Bloomerang. Actually just got off that webinar series. We do Thursdays, usually around noon Eastern. So yeah, we'll put a link to that if folks want to connect to that webinar series too. So let me see if I can full screen this bad boy. Yeah, that's working, right? Okay, so yeah, really kind introduction, so I won't have to belabor anything more about myself. We're gonna talk about donor management, which is what Bloomerang is. Just for context, we're a donor management software company, but everything I'm gonna share now over the next hour or so is totally agnostic. If you're using Razor's Edge, Neon, Donor Perfect, there's a lot of good systems out there, not just Bloomerang. You should be able to do this stuff. So we'll keep it agnostic for sure. So when it comes to like donor management and a donor database, I always kind of like to pose this question, like, what is the true purpose? And I've got kind of an oddball opinion on this. And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer necessarily to like, what should a donor management system actually do or accomplish for you? But my answer to that, and Nancy, you queued it up beautifully by talking about FEP, is I think the primary function of a donor database is to retain the donors you already have, right? And I think that because at its heart, it is a repository, right, of all of the information about your supporters. And I think that one of the biggest goals or metrics you should be looking at, almost on a daily basis, is that retention rate for your organization. So I want to kind of make the case for that here up front, and then we'll get into some kind of tactical stuff of like, okay, how are we actually going to do that? How are we going to use the database to hang on to the donors that you have? And this isn't to say that like you're going to stop acquisition or that acquiring donors is somehow secondary or not important. Not at all. If you ever hear someone say like, retention should be all you do and no acquisition, like run away from that person, that's not good. But I'm kind of a retention guy, so I always kind of like to start there. So Nancy mentioned this, but FEP is an organization that I'm involved with and that Bloomerang is really involved with and has been since about 2012, since Bloomerang was founded. But FEP has been running since about 2006, I think was the first year that they formed. And like Nancy said, they're a collaboration between AFP and the Urban Institute. And last year, or maybe it might have been 2020, but very recently, Giving Tuesday is now a partner with FEP, which is awesome. So we've got like all the geniuses there and the data that they provide as well. What FEP does is they collect data from many of the donor management software providers. So Bloomerang being one of them, like I said, which is how I got involved. But other systems, competitors of ours, even though we all collaborate and get along on this project, which I think is pretty cool. You don't do that very often. Donor Perfect, Neon, Keela. At the end of the year, I guess on January 1st or around January 1st, we send FEP our anonymous customers' transaction data. So just the pure anonymized transactions from the past 2 years. And FEP crunches those numbers and releases a report, usually late March, early April, looking at the past year of how those nonprofits who use those systems did at retaining donors from the previous year on into that year that was studied. So we're recording this on April 21st. We just got the 2021 report a couple of weeks ago. So I think actually you're maybe the fourth or fifth group I presented this to. So this is hot off the presses. So what I'm going to show you is the average rates for how many people who gave in 2020, which was an oddball year, of course, came back and gave again in 2021. It's always like a year behind because we have to wait for that entire year to elapse, right? But this time next year, we'll have 2021, how many of those people came back and gave again in 22, if that makes sense. And we also will report quarterly. So in a couple months, we'll have that first quarter report, which will compare the first quarter of this year to the first quarter of last year. So you can kind of see like, are we trending in kind of the same way through those first 3 months? And that's a nice kind of bellwether to see, how the year is maybe going to shake out. But I'll get to that later on. And if you download any of these reports, and they're all free, and like no salespeople will contact you from any of these firms, nothing like that. But you'll get those things as they come out. So this is the most recent data. So again, this is looking at how many people who gave in 2020 came back and gave again in 2021. And it's not every nonprofit on the planet. It's just the people who use those systems that I mentioned, but it's tens of thousands of nonprofits. It's, billions of dollars in transactions. I do think it's a pretty good overall look at the sector as a whole. And there are other organizations who look at this. So Target Analytics does a retention study every year, very, very similar numbers from about the same size of organization, or not the same size, the amount of organizations that participate. It's we're pretty locked into what's going on, I think, in the whole sector. So the average retention rate is about 42%. So 42% of the people who gave in 2020 came back and gave again at least once by the end of 2021, by the end of last year. And you'll see in a couple slides here that is pretty much status quo since we've been looking at it since 2006 and probably even predating FEP. That's about where we've been, kind of that mid to slightly lower 40th percentile, 43, 46%, 45% usually comes out in that neighborhood. So that's why I say, your donor management system should almost primarily, you can make a case that it'd be primarily be devoted to this issue. because it is kind of an issue for the sector, right? We're losing 50 to 55%, in this case, 58% of our donors every single year, which means we have to reacquire, right, that amount of people just to kind of break even. And you'll see here in a couple more slides that if you can increase your retention rates, if you can get to 45, 50, 55%, that is a lot of extra revenue over the lifetime of those people giving, but we'll get to that in a second. So that 42% number is kind of interesting. It's not super actionable because it's all donors wrapped into one average, right? Whether it's their second gift or their 50th gift, whether they gave $5 or $5 million online, offline, it's everybody rolled into that average number, which is about 42%. You can probably see what's dragging that percentage down. It's the first time rate, only about 19%. So first time donors, even more anemic to get that second gift. So we're going to talk a lot about, hey, how do you move that first time donors into a second gift, which again, your database should facilitate, because you can see what happens if you can get that second gift or a repeat gift, about 61% retention. So a really big jump just from going from one gift to the second gift. Definitely the lowest hanging fruit in terms of, increasing that lifetime value for one specific type of donor. So we're going to touch on first time donors for sure. And it's not on the slide, but just as an aside, monthly donors, those retention rates are upwards of 90%. So again, if you have a robust monthly giving program, you're probably in pretty good shape in terms of donor retention. Now, those numbers have stayed pretty steady year over year. There's slight vacillations, up or down 1 or 2%. And we are on a little bit of a downswing over the past 3 years specifically. But I will caveat by saying, the devil's always in the details here. 2020, we had a massive increase in donors and donations, right? It was a big increase from 2019, assuming because of the pandemic, because of all the increased need. A lot of those first-time donors, like you saw, didn't stick around through the end of 2021. So that's what I think is really contributing to that downward swing here. Not totally hitting the panic button because it's a smaller percentage of a much bigger number. So kind of evens out in the wash. You could say it that way or look at it that way. And I would expect, if Nancy were to have me back this time next year, probably rebound back into that 42, 43, maybe even 40, 44 percentage there. You can see pretty steady, right? It's that 45% basically, if you were to really zoom out over the past, 20 years or so. But this is an opportunity, right? Because if you're losing 55% of your donors, that's tough. That means you're constantly having to do acquisition activities. And it's cheaper and it's easier and it's more fun, I think, to retain the people you already have. And we have a lot of good data on how to do that. And I'll share that and kind of reverse engineer, some things in the database specifically. All that to be said is if your database is simply a Rolodex, right, where you're just recording what people do rather than being kind of actionable and using that data and bringing it to bear in some of your communications and your appeals and your stewardship, that's where we see folks who really, stand out amongst these averages. And again, you'll see in a couple of slides that makes a really big difference for the amount of revenue that they're getting. Now, that average rate's pretty steady, but one thing that is not steady and that I'm really keeping a close eye on, and all of us at FEP and at Boomerang is that first time rate. That's been on a downward trajectory over the last 4 or 5 years, and now it's below 19% for the first time. Now, a lot of that is the pandemic, right? Because in 2020 and for a little bit of 2021, maybe more than a little bit, you had a lot of new donors. There was a big influx of new donors. And this is all laid out in the FEP reports if you want to kind of dig into the details. A lot of those people did not return in 2021. A lot of theories on this. A lot of people, something I hear a lot is, maybe those people resemble disaster donors or, kind of emergency donors, the kinds of people that would maybe give to an earthquake or a tsunami, right? And not necessarily have a big attachment to that specific cause or area where the money went to. Now, I tend to squint my eyes at that a little bit because the pandemic affected everyone, right? It wasn't as though a bunch of money went towards one specific cause versus others. We didn't see that. What I think is happening, and you'll notice that that downward trajectory started before the pandemic, right? And it continued, actually kind of maybe became a little less severe. What I think is happening is it's really easy to donate. It's like really easy to become a donor, right? That barrier to entry is lower than it ever has been. Online giving, peer-to-peer, text to give, all those things are good, but it can be hard to steward those donors, right? Especially on peer-to-peer or things where maybe we don't get the donor information. So what I think is happening is we're sort of maybe settling into a pattern here where we have all these new acquisition channels, again, which is good. The cost per acquisition tends to be lower there. But it's hard to get those people to move into that second gift. Not to say we should give up. I'll give you some suggestions on what to do here, but something to keep an eye on, right? If maybe in your database, you can see like, hey, what percentage of our first-time donors actually give a second gift? That is a really good exercise to go through in your system, because you may identify like, whoa, we may have some work here, or we're doing a great job. Can we replicate some of those things in other areas, right? So it's something that I think is really eye-opening. So definitely something we're keeping an eye on. That repeat rate is really steady. Once you get people giving on an ongoing basis, especially monthly, but annual is good too. It's like inertia, right? It's like that body in motion tends to stay in motion. That is very true of donors as well. But there is that chasm from the first time donor to the second gift, which we will talk about for sure. So this is the ROI I've been alluding to. What I tell people is, if they kind of are nodding their heads at this concept, okay, like what retention rate should we shoot for? Should we go for 50% or 60%? That I think can be a little disappointing. What I say is go for an increase. What are you at now? Calculate that in your system. Okay, you're at 41%. Can you get to 42%? That's okay. 1% can be really impactful over the lifetime of those people giving. This is illustrating a 10% difference, which again, not that much. We're only talking 10%, although that takes a lot of work. I don't want to minimize, the accomplishment of going from 41 to 51%, for example. You can see what happens over the lifetime of those people giving. The organization at 51%, they're raising like $500,000 more from those retained donors than their counterpart at 41%. It's like compound interest. It's like amazing, that like hockey stick that happens over time. And one thing this slide doesn't illustrate, which might even be more important or compelling, is those people that stuck with you, they're probably doing other things, or at least more likely to do other things besides those donations. Maybe they're volunteering for you. Maybe they're serving on a board or a committee. Much more likely that they write you into their will, right, or estate plans. So there's lots of benefits to retaining people over a longer period of time, besides just those, additional gifts that you get before they finally do stop giving because they pass away, or they stop giving for whatever reason, just that natural attrition. The same thing happens on the first, it happens everywhere, but this is showing what happens when you increase your first time retention rate. So going from 20%, which is about average, to 30%, the bottom table, again, just a 10% difference, but you can see what happens. It's almost $250,000 more at a certain average gift size and a certain database size. And if you want, I'll send you this Excel spreadsheet. I forgot to link it in the slides, so I'll put that in there before I send it to Nancy. But you can plug in your numbers, like, okay, how many people do we have in our database? What's our average gift size? What's our current retention? And then what's our target, or what would happen if we could increase that rate? And you can see for yourself and show it to your board or your boss and be like, hey, maybe we should focus on this, because look at the ROI, way more money than we would get perhaps doing an acquisition campaign or an event or something like that. And again, those things are good, but they are likely more cost effective and less time intensive to generate that ROI from doing retention-based activities than perhaps other things like acquisition. So that's where we're at, right? And why I think it's a problem. So how can the database help? Well, we have a lot of research into why this happens, right? So why donors stop giving, why they keep giving, what are high performing organizations doing to hang on to their donors? I think that should be our guide. And there are tons of people looking at this. Every single year, Penelope Burke puts out her donor survey that reiterates everything I'm going to show you. Jen Shang is looking at this. Tons of people doing donor loyalty research spanning decades, and all the answers are basically the same. Donors want to be thanked. They want to know the impact of their gift. And they want to feel like, they're appreciated for helping out and doing something good in the world. What is that thing that has happened? So I've cherry picked just a couple, 2 or 3 studies here. But again, if you were to look at any of those other pieces of work, basically they say the same thing. This is a little bit older. This is from 2001. This is like one of the first kind of major donor loyalty studies that was done by Adrian Sargent, who he's like the godfather of retention. He asked a large cohort of lapsed donors. So he collected lapsed donor information from a cohort of nonprofits, surveyed them, basically said, hey, why'd you stop giving? What happened? Pretty novel question, right? And you got enough responses for it to be statistically relevant. And some things uncontrollable, people passed away. A big chunk of people said that they had financial difficulties. That is always the top answer in any of these kinds of surveys, financial difficulty. Whether it's true or not, I think if you are confronted about your charitable giving, like that's a pretty easy fallback answer. Could be true, might be true in a lot of cases. Either way, nothing we can do about it. But the left-hand column of answers here, I think are at least a little bit controllable by us as fundraisers. The donor didn't think they were needed. They didn't get those stories of who was being helped. They didn't remember supporting, maybe because they were never thanked at all. So again, this concept of thanking and reporting on outcomes, not throwing a parade for people, not ceding too much power to them, like that's bad. You don't want to go down that rabbit hole for sure. But, donors do want to know, what are the awesome things that your organization is doing, with the help of those gifts? And probably you're doing a lot of that. Maybe you put those things in your monthly newsletter or your annual report, ever present, always telling those stories, surprising people with those stories, social media, email, in your appeals, making those things always front and center, really, really helpful for retention. The key here is delivering the right story to the right person at the right time. And that to me is a function of the database. And we'll talk about that for sure. So you look at, 5, 8, 9, 13%, that's a pretty big chunk of retention right there, just focusing on stewardship. And that's kind of how I define stewardship, is these concepts here that donors are saying, they want from us. Speaking of what donors want from us, looking at the other side of the coin, that's why people leave, but why do they stay? This was a study that was done more recently by a group called the Donor Voice, and they gathered a cohort of nonprofits that were pretty high performing, high retention rates, higher than average retention rates. And they looked in their database and they kind of identified like cream of the crop donors, people that have been giving for many years consistently, multiple gifts within a year, upgrades, soft credits, people we all wish we had in our databases, and ask them, hey, why do you keep giving to these organizations? What is it that they are doing? And it's almost the exact opposite side of the coin from the Sargent survey from 10 years prior. They think that the organization they support is effective, right? They know what to expect from them. They don't get weird things from them that don't make any sense for what kind of donor they are or who they are. They're thanked quickly in a timely manner. I use timely and quickly kind of interchangeably. Their views are solicited. How do you think we're doing in terms of communicating to you? Are we telling you the right stories? Why do you give to us? Why do you care about the homelessness situation in Austin, right? Why are you passionate about that cause? That is a really big indicator of engagement when not only you're asking those questions, but they are answering them and giving you good information. We're going to talk about that later on. 5 to 7, they start to repeat, like they feel like they're part of an important cause. They think the organization is effective. They feel appreciated. They're being thanked. And again, the stories, who is being helped, right? Who are the animals being adopted? Who are the families that were getting out of poverty and into a home? Telling those stories makes it so sticky to keep giving, because people give ostensibly because they're pissed off about something that's happening in the world or in their community, and they want to solve that problem, right? And they want that to go away. And if you can say it's going away, or we're making progress, or look at the lives that are changed, that's what gets people, really hooked on giving. And we have a brand new, semi-brand new, this is last September, very same type of study where they were asking monthly donors. They call them subscription donors in this particular study, people that give monthly but also do other things. So high retention rates, super loyal donors. What do you want? What do you want to get from these organizations you support? Stories of, who my gift has helped or what my gift has helped. What's going on in the organization, frequent updates, what is that nonprofit doing? What are they up to? What are the successes, that they're achieving? And then what's the impact again, and the thank yous. So, I'll be talking about this for 30, 40 more years. And every time a study comes out, I feel like it's going to say the same thing, right? I don't think donors have really changed their methods or reasons for giving, as long as we live in the type of capitalistic society we live in. This is what donors want, and you can go overboard, right? And there's a lot of really smart people talking about this. I'm not talking about throwing a parade for people or ceding too much power to a small group of donors who then become controlling of the organization. Tout your successes, right? These are the awesome things we're doing, and through your support, we are able to make those things happen. So thank you. And by the way, we're going to keep going because there's a lot more work to do, and you can help the next family get into that house. This is what donors want. And your database, I feel like, again, should facilitate all these things, right? Facilitate that thanking process and the storytelling process, and giving the right stories to the right people at the same time, and setting the stage. What are we going to be sending to you? And also facilitating those questions. What is it that you're passionate about as a donor? How did you hear about us? Why do you care about this cause? What kind of stories would you like to hear from us? Really, the database, rather than being very passive, right, and just being this kind of online Rolodex, should facilitate the ability to kind of make these points of research actually come to fruition within your donor communications. So there's a lot of ways to tackle this, right? And other systems are going to help. Email, your design, your social media. The database isn't the only place to do these things, but it's a really good place to do these things. And there are some things that are very specific to the database. The very first thing I recommend is segmentation. To me, this is like the bread and butter of what a good database should do for you. And really all of them can do it. When I say segmentation, all I really mean is creating smaller lists or segments or cohorts or buckets of like-minded people that you would communicate to in a way that maybe would look a little different than how you communicate to other segments in your database. When I see our customers, only because those are the people I have the most visibility into, but I would imagine this, extends outward beyond our customers. When I see our customers who have high retention rates, the first thing I always notice in their database is that they are doing some form of segmentation. They aren't just saying, let's queue up an email or a letter or a newsletter or whatever to everyone in Bloomerang and blast it out to all 1,000 people in there, and we'll try to be all things to all people in that piece of content. That usually is not going to be a strong recipe for success. What is when you can say, let's queue up a letter or an appeal or an email to this specific segment, because we know the people in this segment have similar characteristics or give at certain frequencies or for different reasons. We want to say something to them or ask them to do a very specific thing that we wouldn't ask another group of people, because it probably wouldn't make much sense to ask them. So let me give you an example of this, because I know it can seem a little ethereal. This is a customer of ours. They run a public school foundation in New York State. And Heather, she's awesome. She's like the queen of segmentation. Like, I think it's her goal to break Bloomerang. Like, if anybody's going to do it, it's probably going to be her. They have a lot of different types of people who support the school foundation. They have parents, right, who send their kids there. They have grandparents who have grandkids there. They have the alumni. They have grown on into adulthood. Perhaps they would want to give back to that school that was so formative to them. They have people who live in Skaneateles who don't have kids or don't send their kids there, or their kids are too old. How you talk to all those groups, right? That case for support is different than in one group than to another, right? You can imagine one letter reading, Dear Stephen, as the parent of a fourth grader here, the value, firsthand of the education we're providing. Would you consider supporting us so we can keep up that level of quality? I'm not a great copywriter, so I'm not a copywriter at all, in fact, but you can see how that case for support would maybe look a little different to someone who doesn't have kids. Like, Dear Nancy, you may not know us, but we're the public school foundation here in Skaneateles. You probably don't want to live somewhere with crappy schools. So, would you consider supporting us? Different approach, right? And it's not just in the appeals, it's in everything, the acknowledgements, the stewardship. That's a persona-based segmentation, right? But you don't have to stop there. In fact, I recommend you don't stop there, because there are other really interesting things where you can see on this middle table, the frequency of giving. Have they ever given before? They are pure prospect, they've never given, right? Have they given once but not twice? Once but not twice. Very, very important segment. Again, thinking of those retention rates going from 19% to 60%. They give every single year like clockwork, right? They've given multiple times. A monthly donor, perhaps, a lapsed donor. How you talk to those people, how you thank them, welcoming a brand new donor versus you wouldn't welcome a monthly donor, right? Because they are giving on a schedule and have been giving for a while. What you ask them to do, asking a lapsed donor, to consider coming back, asking a first-time donor to make the second gift, asking a monthly donor to upgrade or give a special, extra 13th gift, maybe at year end. This is where segmentation really, really gets powerful, because you can illustrate to the donor or the prospect, who they are, thank them for doing that thing, for that segment they're in, and then ask them for an outcome that is very specific to them that may not be the desired outcome for another segment, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
This is where I really see the database being so powerful for retention for sure, but this comes into play with acquisition, right? Because even within that prospect segment, you may have subsegments, right, that you might want to appeal to differently, depending on what your organization does or what the cause is all about. An animal shelter may have within their prospects people who have adopted animals and people who have not adopted animals, right? That's a subsegment within that prospect segment, for example, or dog people and cat people, and maybe you would want to do something fun and clever that way. Building this out in your database, all it is reporting, right? A segment is just a fancy word for a report. What's our first-time donor report? Looking at that, all of our monthly donors. These are our lapsed donors. These are our, whoever, alumni. And get out the whiteboard, because this can be a fun activity if you're kind of a dork like me, to build out all these potential segments and personas, and then think about, oh yeah, maybe we could say this to them, or ask these people for a certain thing beyond this, or maybe you've got a specific campaign coming up that one segment would be a really hot prospect for over another. This really starts to open up. And we saw this. This is a good strategy in any normal period of time, as normal as we can be, right? But during the pandemic, this became even more critical, because people were getting bombarded by so many appeals. Any nonprofit that they ever, drove by in their lifetime probably reached out for help during the pandemic, right? With good reason. I'm not bemoaning that. But segmentation really allowed organizations to kind of rise above that noise. This was a campaign that a customer in, I think, Portland, Oregon, or near Portland did. It was early March of 2020. And things were looking pretty bleak, right? They were thinking about having to close the shelter. I think they actually had made a decision to close the shelter. And rather than going out and just saying, okay, let's email everyone in Bloomerang and just kind of do a generic crisis appeal, let's split it into 3 groups, which I thought were really good groups that anyone can emulate. Lapsed donors, so people who hadn't given in a while, certainly hadn't given that calendar year. recent active donors, people that had given recently, you're kind of going back rather quickly to those people, right? And asking for help again. And then monthly donors, current active, monthly recurring donors. And what they did in the piece, and you kind of have to squint to see, but not wildly different content, but what they asked for, we'd love to have you back, versus we know you just gave recently, we're in crisis, would you be willing to chip in a little bit more? And then monthly donors like, we love you, you're awesome, we know you're a monthly donor, would you be willing to increase your giving, up your monthly contribution? So you're kind of acknowledging what group they're in, thanking them, or saying maybe we miss you in the case of lapsed donors, and then asking for a specific thing. And this campaign raised about 17 grand, and we didn't A/B test it, but me and Sarah, the fundraiser, we feel very confident that like if it had been flattened and genericized, right, might have been alienating to those recent donors. It's like, oh, I just gave last month. You're already asking me again. Don't you know I just gave? Or dang, I'm a monthly donor. Like, don't you know I'm a monthly donor? Why would I need to do this? That's why I set up the monthly donation. What this allows you to do is like bypass all that and even sort of, pat those people on the back for that thing they're already doing or did, and say, you know what, we need a little bit of extra help, or would you be willing to do this again? Really, really powerful. And I would imagine it would not have been nearly as successful. They had monthly donors who upgraded. They had monthly donors who just gave a one-time gift and just kept the monthly giving rolling, which is really a really good signal. They had lapsed donors come back, not a ton. It's really hard to get lapsed donors back, but they got some. And then some of those people who gave, in January or February, gave again in March. And dang, now you got 2 gifts within 1 calendar year, and you're not even in the Q2. That's a really strong signal. So there are lots of different, you could fill a whiteboard and a chalkboard, or, a piece of paper. You could fill a journal with these. These are some of the things I recommend, and we talked a lot about them already, but these are reports just have in your database that you can bookmark or go to. FirstTime Donors this week, this month, even today, if you have a higher gift volume, just have some visibility. Welcome those people, right? Who are those long-term loyal donors? Our monthly donors, our lapsed donors, people who upgrade. Hey, thanks for upgrading. We noticed you increased that amount of giving. Volunteers who have never donated, interesting report to maybe look at. That's a great segment where they are getting, a unique appeal that no one else is getting, right? Hey, thanks so much, Nancy, for volunteering. You've been so helpful to us over the past few months. By the way, that barn you came over to paint just so happens to need a new roof, before the end of the year. Would you be willing to pitch in $7-10 to our roof fund, kind of tying it to the volunteerism, just as an example. That's why segmentation is so powerful, because you can just like drill into who are they, how do they support you, how can you tie that to the subsequent appeal. Much more effective than just kind of these blanket one size fits all, messaging that you're sending out. So I wanted to highlight real quickly before we run out of time, just a couple of these segments where I think you can do some good here kind of quickly. And probably won't surprise you that first I'm going to zero in on those first-time donors again, because low retention rates, it's been falling. We looked at what our customers are doing who seem to have higher than average retention rates. Here is, what we think is maybe a good starting point. I wouldn't do this exactly for everybody. Every organization is different. But who are your first-time donors? What are they getting from you in that first 90 days? A welcome kit, a phone call, a survey. Who are you? Why did you give? Why do you care about us? Can you get them in for a tour? Maybe they get your monthly newsletter with everybody else, which is totally cool. That makes sense. An extra stewardship piece, another phone call. The purpose of this is no one else gets this stuff, right? An ongoing repeat donor, they're not going to get this stuff because you probably already know something about them or they know about you. This is, you create your segments, but then you also kind of create that cadence or that communication plan for each segment. And this is where I would start, because again, if you can go from the first gift to the second gift, I know I sound like a broken record, but that's a huge jump in retention that you will not see on any other donor type or donor frequency. So, grab this, move things around, the timing, whatever you think makes sense. But we found phone calls really, really powerful. Surveys, if they answer, it's usually about a 10% response rate. So don't get discouraged if you don't get a lot of responses to your survey. But the people who do respond, they're kind of self-selecting, right, into a more engaged group, and might be giving you some really good information about kind of what makes them tick. Conversely, who are your most loyal donors? Who are the people that have been giving year after year like clockwork? These are your best Bequest prospects. These are people you could convert into monthly giving, major gifts. These are like your people. So make sure, you're recognizing that. Hey, Nancy, you've been giving to us for 5 years. Or, hey, Aaron, that was your 10th gift to us over 10 years. Like, wow, we just so appreciate that. Just again, calling out that what kind of donor they are. Those longtime loyal donors, much, much more likely that you get major gifts and planned gifts from, regardless of gift amount, regardless of their age or wealth. Those aren't the top signals. It's that longevity of giving, at least according to this study by Jerry Panis. He looked at all of the bequests that he had collected over his agency's career and looked at all those people and like, okay, what were they? And the top things were, again, that longevity of giving. Monthly donors tend to go a little bit ignored, right? Because it's like, oh, that's $5 a month. It doesn't seem like that much, but $5 a month, that's $70 a year at a 90% retention rate. That's a lifetime value in the thousands of dollars. So don't sleep on those people. It's kind of hard to lose a monthly donor, right? It's super sticky, but don't ignore them. Every once in a while, maybe it's a handwritten note or a phone call or a video. Hey, Nancy, thanks so much for being a monthly donor. We so appreciate you. Like, you're keeping the lights on. When I look at monthly donors in our customers database, one thing I see is people have been giving the same gift amount for decades. And I'm guilty of this as well. Public radio here in Indy, I've been given $5 a month for probably 12 years or more. And I know I should go in and upgrade that myself. But if they asked, like, hey, Steven, could you go to $7 a month this year? Yeah, go ahead. Like, yeah, where do I need to click? People just sit there and it's just like, lifetime value going out the window. So don't be afraid. Ask for that upgrade, maybe on an annual basis or an extra gift, but make sure it's segmented so that you can say, hey, Nancy, know you're a monthly donor. Thank you. You're awesome. Would you be willing to do blah, 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 wherever you want that thing to be? Versus everybody gets that year-end appeal from you, whether they're a monthly donor or a lapsed donor, or they've been giving every single year like clockwork, probably not going to resonate as much. I know it seems like a lot of work, but super high ROI if you take the time to do this. And it can be a lot more fun, I think, but also easier to kind of identify like, okay, what is the messaging that's resonating versus not resonating in these individual cohorts, versus if you send one generic thing to everybody, you have no idea, what it is necessarily that worked or didn't work on those individuals. This is a big one to me. This is a report I would have in the database. They volunteered, right? If you're recording that in the database, hopefully you are, but they've never given. Ask these people, like, for Pete's sakes. A lot of times it's like, oh, we're afraid. They're already volunteering. We don't want to, make them mad by also giving. Volunteers are way more likely to give than non-volunteers. I mean, versus a total stranger prospect who isn't supporting you in some other way. Ask them, but do it again. You probably see where this is going, in a segmented way. Hey, Nancy, thanks for being a volunteer. You were so awesome to come by with your company or that church group or like whatever it was, or just, you by yourself. You can keep that impact going. Or, hey, that thing that you helped out with, it could also benefit from financial support as well. That's where the appeals fail. It's like you're a volunteer, you get a generic appeal that everybody else gets, and it's like, I already volunteered, right? There wasn't anything in that kind of spoke directly to what I'm doing. And the other key with volunteers is make sure they feel really appreciated. right? Are you sending them a video thank you or a handwritten note, or again, just something specific to that volunteerism, especially corporate groups? This is an example where we volunteered as a company, and then they sent us a nice video to the company just to say thank you. So if you're going to ask volunteers to donate, make sure they've been really thanked on that front end, because that's even going to be, even harder to overcome if they haven't been. And then this is a little bit of a bizarre one. I'll end it here. But this is a sneaky good one that, again, I think you can replicate in your database. So you all are in Austin. This is perfect, because I'm assuming most of you, and Aaron, from what I heard, you have a very specific kind of geographic footprint, like you help Austin.
Yes.
So in your database, are there people outside of Austin or outside of Texas that are giving to you? Like, do you have anyone in Indianapolis giving to you, or Florida, or San Francisco, or Oregon?
Mm-hmm.
You might want to have some visibility into that, because there may be something interesting happening that you might want to reach out to those people. And I'll tell you a personal story to kind of illuminate this. I went backwards a slide. This is actually a piece of our household budget. My wife and I, these are the nonprofits we support monthly. And again, I need to go in and upgrade those numbers, because most of these numbers I've been giving for years and years, and I kind of feel bad. But if they asked me, I would upgrade it. But anyway, I already said that. Most of these organizations are in Indianapolis, where we live. There's a couple of national organizations like Charity Water, actually the international, Moms Demand Action, that's nationwide, gun control. One of these organizations, though, is not in Indy and is not nationwide. It's that Buzzards Bay at the bottom. Buzzards Bay is a bay between Cape Cod and the south coast of Massachusetts. It's a small estuary. They do environmental work there to keep it clean, because it's a big waterway, a lot of tourism and vacationers and ferries going to the islands, and it can get a little dirty, but they do really good work keeping it clean for everybody who lives there and visits there. So they do a great job communicating to us. Any guesses why we support them? We live in Indy. We don't live in Massachusetts or Rhode Island. Any
vacation
guesses?
there?
Yeah, we do vacation there. Keep digging. Why do we vacation there? Go one layer deeper.
You have family there?
Yep, I do have family there. My mom lives there. I grew up there. I actually grew up in New Bedford, Massachusetts. And I said to myself, when I become a fully functioning adult, which is, somewhat debatable, I suppose, I wanted to support this, right? Because that was very formative for my childhood. We visit there. I love to bring our kids there, and pal around the places that I my old stomping grounds. They made a very good effort in seeing that and being like, hey, thanks so much for being a monthly donor. By the way, you live in Indiana. What's the deal? And I was able to tell that story, right? And now they know something very important about me. Why you give is, I think, the single most important data point you can have in your database of a supporter, because then you can tell certain stories or ask for certain things. And by the way, I'm going to go bounce back to that slide. I am an excellent Bequest prospect for that organization. I'm a monthly donor. I have that family connection, that fifth point there at the bottom. I've been giving for many, many years. I'm also a monthly donor. I'm 38 and I'm not a wealthy person. So I don't, really set off a lot of alarm bells for bequest giving conventionally, but in actuality, I am a really good bequest donor. And I would hope that I am on some sort of track for them, because I'm like checking all the boxes, right? And I've got kids, and actually we just updated our will, because when you have a first baby or a subsequent child or adopt or whatever, that's like when you do that, amongst other sort of life goalposts, you might do that. So that's why I recommend looking at that, especially for you all, because you're in a metro geographic area. Could be a fun report. It's all your donors, filter by that column by their city or state or whatever. And I gave this presentation at a conference, I think in Idaho one time, and somebody raised their hand and said, a couple of weeks ago, they were a food bank in Boise, I think, and they said, we got 2 giant bags of barley donated to us from somebody in Wisconsin. And I was like, you better freaking ask them, like, what happened? And they did. After the presentation, the fundraiser from Boise emailed me and said, yeah, I emailed that person just to say, hey, what's the deal? And found out they used to live in Boise. They moved for work or whatever. And they actually received services from that food bank, and they wanted to give back. Now they have a farm. I actually don't know what the food bank is going to do with raw barley. That may actually be kind of a burden, but it was an interesting kind of an eye-opening thing of like, if they do have that out-of-town support, maybe they're a former service recipient. There's some kind of connection there that you might want to dig into. And then the last thing I'll recommend is, if you're surveying your donors, which is the number 4 thing on that loyalty list from Donor Voice, you may get these kinds of pieces of information or stories kind of proactively. And you can do this in your database. If there's an email provider, like we have a survey built into Bloomerang, but don't let the technology get in the way, like SurveyMonkey, Google Forms. There's all kinds of things you can use there. But we make it easy for folks to just be asking those questions. So pay attention to those interesting signals or segments, create them in your database. Monthly donors, people that were the children of donors, they are really good prospects for sure. People who give you updated contact information. There's just a myriad of things that you can be looking for, but just be on the lookout for those signals and reach out, thank them for doing those interesting things, or offer condolences, right? If somebody passes away and it was a parent or a spouse or a partner of theirs, that just opens the door so much more effective than these kinds of, one size fits all communications. So segmentation, the first time donors, specifically, if that's all you do, you will be well ahead of most folks asking those questions. Why did you give? Why do you care about us? Why do you support us from 1,000 miles away? It's not going to be many. That's definitely a corner case example, but dang, that could be a big time supporter, right? If you just kind of are showing that curiosity. So speaking of databases, like I said, that's what Bloomerang is. We're pretty easy to find. But Nancy, I think we had till 1:15 your time. So
Yes.
I'm cool to take questions. And if you're watching this as a recording, like reach out, email me, connect with me on LinkedIn. Because I'd be happy to talk to you then. But yeah, that's my database spiel for you.
Okay, so Steve, why don't you stop your share? Let me do mine.
Okay.
We're going to end up real quick. I do want to say a couple of things about, there was so much good stuff in here. And I was running around looking for a pen. But, let's see now. I want to share my screen just briefly here.
Okay, go for it.
So,
yeah, I see it.
Wait a minute. It always takes me a second to figure out where am I on this
I know,
thing?
the same way.
Okay, there we go. So before I ask for questions, I just wanted to say 2 things. On the lapsed donor slide,
Yeah.
first of all, I have 2 mini courses, online courses that I do. One is a collection storytelling mini course, and one is the monthly giving, how to actually establish a monthly giving program, which
Nice.
some people don't even understand. There's a difference between just providing
Right.
that option as opposed to launching a real program. Well, anyway, what I remember from my own course is that on the lapsed donors are some of the best people you can reach out to for to bring back in for monthly giving program. But also, you said 52% of the people surveyed said they didn't give again. They didn't give the second gift because they couldn't afford it. And again, that is such a ripe area for a monthly giving program.
Monthly.
Because,
Yep.
right?
It's easy on the budget.
Yeah, like $10 a month is a little bit better than that annual appeal that asks them maybe for
Absolutely.
$150. Yeah. And then the other thing, just very briefly wanted to say about the storytelling, which of course I'm a big fan of all that. I worked with a lot of Native American people. It's all storytelling. Everything is storytelling up there. But the challenge for nonprofits I've found sometimes can be, how do you marry the data and the stories? And I know that the bigger funders, like here in Texas, it's Meadows Foundation. Yes, they have personally told me that you've got to make our primary trustee either laugh or cry on the first page of your grant request. Okay, so you got to have a compelling story, but then you have to be able to extrapolate. Yeah, but how does that work for your entire community? What's the impact in your community? How do you align your data and your story? So to me, that's a whole other way to be looking at your database. You know, you look at your database and you say, this is someone who's donated maybe $20 a month for 10 years. Let me get their story. We don't think about that too often. Are there any questions? I know we're at the end, but Erin or Haley?
No, I think that this is, because we're so grassroots, it's very far beyond what we have for data. We've got 375 contacts. So the data will have to come from kind of hand parsed information. I can certainly look at their address and see if they're in or out of town, things like that. But we have one monthly donor, which is beautiful. But I am intrigued by setting up a monthly program. So I'll definitely look at your course on that, Nancy. So this is really helpful. Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, you're in good shape. I mean, I bet you could get that number from 1 to double digits.
Yes.
Oh yeah,
calling Nancy
that would be
West.
awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I bet you can do it.
Yeah,
That would be awesome.
Contact me about that program I have. It's very inexpensive.
Okay. Yeah,
Haley, what
definitely.
about you? I know you have Bloomerang, you're using it.
Oh, nice. I should have known.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we do have it and we love it. And
Right
we
on.
actually even use it like, so I'm with Austin Wildlife Rescue. So we take in about 9,500
yeah.
animals a year. And so we figured out how to actually make it do both for us. Like we're able to track our animal data and the donor data together.
That's so cool.
In a special way. And we could not figure out, when we were really looking at databases, yours was the one that could do that for us. And there was not another one we could find that could do both without kind of double the work, like one system for animals, one system for, and then the donor data that went with that, and then having to double do it, double enter it and all that. So it's worked really well for us. I just looked at our donor retention and it's low.
It's okay.
Yeah.
We need to work on that. Although for us, I guess we need to figure out, and it can be done as you're saying, but we get so many people, they drop off an animal. It's a one-off. They give us some money to go with that animal.
Yeah.
So I think in a way we expect donor retention to be low a little bit because of that. So I guess though, targeting those one-time drop-off donors and figuring out what it is that would make them give again would be
So
what we need to do.
when I go to Wildlife Rescue, which I used to do rather frequently, there was a little table out there with a donation jar, but I don't remember anybody collecting information from me.
Yeah, so that form that you filled out, which was paper and actually is now it's a form that we have people fill out on a tablet, and then we import it into Boomerang each week.
So that's the trick then. You take those, because you have a zillion people that drop off injured animals. So
we have a huge database of people.
Yes. So that's the trick, is getting your stewardship. Steve has another chart that we used maybe a year ago in my individual donor program meetup, where it talked about if you called someone within, what was it, Steve? It was like 24 or 48 hours. This was the retention rate. I mean, really, that's where your board, I don't know how the board is these days at your place, but you really have to have people making phone calls,
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. We need
really
to probably,
powerful for first-time donors.
Yeah, to target the people that are dropping off. They drop off, they donate, and then they get a phone call. Right now they get, if they donate online, they get kind of a generated thank you. If they give us a check or something, we mail them a thank you.
Right.
And so we need to switch that up a little more and target those, you're right, those first time, one-time donors. I think a lot, they feel like they owe us because they dropped off the animal and then they're kind of done, but we obviously provided that service for them if they ever found one again. So we need to work on those.
Well, it might
That's a
be
perfect
interesting.
segment.
It might also be interesting, those people who are dropping off injured animals obviously care about animals, right? They might be perfect to target for a monthly giving program. Those people might pay $10 a month, So that's a whole nother angle with that group, I think. this is really valuable stuff. I wish we had a little bit more time. I did want to show you what next month's going to be about. I can't even see it all of a sudden. Oh, I can move that. Oh.
Nice.
Next month could be my last meetup. I don't know. We'll see how this goes, but next month I have the United Way of Knoxville. They have these incredible people that work in these programs. They support 50 nonprofits in Knoxville. And those people are going to come talk to us about how you make the connection between fundraising and communications, how you do it, how you align all of those pieces for any size nonprofit. So I'm hoping you guys will come to that. And then of course,
cool.
here's the other information for joining us. You guys are already in the Facebook group, so you already know that. And then my website, Erin, you can read about this storytelling and monthly giving program on my website, but you'll probably need to contact me because there's no enrollment right at this minute, but you know, yeah. So I just wanted to, I really appreciate Haley and Erin showing up. And of course, oh my goodness, Stephen, everything you do. I mean, I'm always so impressed when I go in and read another one of your blogs and where are you getting your time? Are you really cloned? I mean,
yeah, I have an evil twin that doesn't get on camera. He does all the work.
I love reading your stuff too. You are.
Maybe I'm the evil twin. I don't know.
So, well, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks.
Yeah, anytime.
All right. Well, I guess we're a little over, but I really appreciate everybody showing up today. Thank you guys.
Right.
Thank
See you guys.
you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.